All right, so we are here at the Mount of Beatitudes. I'll give you sort of a historical background on the location. The identification of this site by for the Sermon on the Mount was given by the Byzantines. Right, Byzantines, they actually built 3 churches around in this immediate area. One on top of the church, on the slopes of the hill, right, which we'll kind of see just a little remnant of it when we go down later on. And then they had 2 churches, one dedicated to the feeding of the 5,000, and the other one dedicated to Jesus reappearing to the disciples on the shoreline when he reaffirms Peter's place in the ministry. And some academics and historians will say that sometimes the Byzantines were just completely arbitrary of where a site is. Like there are 3 ways of them deciding this is where this happened. They would ask the local Judeo-Christian community that existed in Palestine at the time, in Palestine at the time. They would use, if there was like a geographical, topographical anomaly, right? This will be some sort of decision that here, this is where a miracle takes place. And sometimes it's completely arbitrary. Yeah, right over here, this is where Goliath's head is buried, right along the road to Jerusalem. So we're going to throw stones at it along the way, right? You can still see this today, by the way, right? There's like this big pile of rocks along the road to Jerusalem, right? So some historians and academics will say this wasn't a completely arbitrary place because where they built their church is on the slope of this mountain. And to build a large building like a Byzantine church would have been on the slope of a mountain, that takes a lot of work because you have to cut out a huge chunk of the mountain in order to do so. So some of the thinking is that they wouldn't have gone through all that work if it was just a completely willy-nilly arbitrary place. Right now, the modern grounds, the land was bought in the 1830s by an Italian Catholic organization, a group of people that wanted to come to the land of Israel, to the Holy Land, and to reinvigorate the land, right? Because again, underneath the Turkish Ottoman rulership, the land of Palestine went into deforestation, right? Not a lot of economic growth, backwater of this vast empire. And so they had the idea that if you start working the land of Israel, making it beautiful again, you're going to hasten the coming of Jesus, the second coming. Right now, this might sound kind of like an interesting concept, but it wasn't. This actually concept wasn't unique to this Italian group of people. There are actually a number of different communities, Christian communities throughout the world that had this idea that because the land is so derelict and so badly taken care of, Jesus, it'll take longer for him to come. So if we go and we work the land and make it beautiful, it will hasten his return. You had Americans, actually from a group of Americans from Maine that came in the 1860s that had a horrible time of it. Did not work out very well for them for various reasons. And then you also had Germans who came in the 1860s, and they were very successful, actually. They had a number of colonies throughout the land. They were called the Templars, and maybe we'll talk about them later on our tour, right? But this wasn't unique. Now, this Italian group, they didn't have a very successful outcome, right, of trying to grow crops and maintain sort of survivability out here. But it maintained, so the project was failed, but the land continued to be held by this Italian organization. And then in the 1920s, the state of Italy wanted to increase the national prestige, right? And the way that you increase national prestige in the early 20th century, one way of doing it, right, is by having buildings and institutions in Jerusalem, right? The British had this, the French, the Russians, and the Italians also want to do this as well, right? And so the Italian state donated money to build the modern church that we see behind us, right, in the 1920s. And the architect of the church was a man named Antonio Barluzzi. He came to Palestine commissioned to build one church. He, just like me, he came as a tourist. He fell in love with the country, fell in love with the land, and he wanted to stay. And he stayed and he built many, many churches, about half a dozen or so throughout the land, and a few more we're going to visit. Right, so it was the Italian government that built the church. Interestingly enough, the Italian government in the 1920s was Benito Mussolini. Right, so, and Antonio Barluzzi was like a big follower of Mussolini. There actually was an inscription at the entrance to the church sort of dating the building of the church to when the fascist government of Italy took over, because they changed the calendar in Italy. Some people do. The French Revolution people did this as well. Anyway, it has 8 you might think it's sort of designed on a Byzantine style octagonal church, but it's actually 8 corners for the 8 Beatitudes, right, that Jesus gives in his sermon, right? And speaking of the sermon, all right, so I'm going to read to you from Matthew chapter 5. Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him. He opened his mouth and taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall receive mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sakes, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you." I was once here with a pilgrim group, and what the pastor said really was interesting to me, and I thought I'd remember it and pass it on to other groups. He starts off by saying that there's no Christian law, right? The idea of law, like religious law in Christianity, doesn't really exist. At least not to the same extent that Judaism and Islam have it. Right? There is a law, there are like rules of how you behave, but it's not a law. It's not like if your ox gourds somebody's cow, right? What do you have to pay, right, for the person for the damages? Right? This actually is discussed in Jewish law, right, and Islamic law. It's not just rules of how you do daily life, but deals with how you dispute the differences in how you dispute between people, right, on a case law basis, right? So you have this in Jewish law. You don't have this in Christianity. But he says if you're going to point to one thing that Jesus talks about and preaches, right, and say this, right, should be the foundation, or could be the foundation of Christian law, it's what he says here at the Mount of Beatitudes. How you behave towards fellow human beings, how you have your relationship with God, how you need to look after and take care of one another, right? This is the basis of how your actions and how your beliefs should be the foundation of, and how you're going to interact with other humans and your relationship with God, right? This, and to love the Lord your God with all your heart and all your mind, with all your soul, right? These are the 2 sort of main tenets that Jesus would have wanted as sort of the basis for Christian law, if such a thing existed.